Imagine, if you will, you're a forager, an urban forager, and in the city that you live in, there aren't a whole lot of options. So you go on a nature trail that just so happens to be right next to your house. And sometimes you come across gems. So you walk down the nature trails and you're finding all of these plants, like you're finding Kentucky coffee trees. You're finding all of these really interesting plants. You're finding dryad mushrooms. You're picking rose hips in the wintertime. You're picking crab apples. You're picking cattails because there's an entire stream little area. And then there's even a willow that you can find. And then you stop and you look to your right, and there's something there that stops you in your tracks. Something so terrifying that Bigfoot himself would run screaming. Teasle. A plant that grows in tall stalks with spiky flowers at the very top, and at the bottom, coarse, fibrous, broad leaves that cover the entire ground around it around a 5-foot radius. They're everywhere. You look left, you look right, they're everywhere. Everywhere you turn, and at some point you get lost. You get lost because there's just too much teasle and nothing else. It is a barren wasteland. There is nothing else, just teasle. That was my experience whenever I went foraging on my local trail the other year. I have slowly watched in my town the silent invasion of an invasive species known as teasle, common teasle, wild teasle, which has extremely detrimental effects on the surrounding ecosystem. Now, this doesn't just affect the other plants nearby. No, it also affects the birds. It affects the things that eat the birds. It affects the things that eat the things that eat the birds. And then it affects people. Mostly, if you live in the Midwest like I do, it affects farmers. Teasle, if you don't know, is an invasive species with very broad leaves. Its seeds can be spread up to 5 feet just by itself. Just by itself, they can spread up to 5 feet. They grow in these dense clusters that become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until, slowly creeping up and killing all of the different plants, the native plants. They cluster more and more and more, and they creep out within a year or two. And then all of a sudden, nothing will grow except teasle. Is it useful? Are there uses for teasle in textiles? Yes. Weirdly enough, you can make you can use the fibers and you can make types of cloth from it. That is a good use, but by itself, not being actively farmed and allowing it to spread more and more and more out into the rest of an area like a walking trail where you want to walk and you want to enjoy the scenery and you want to be able to look at all the flowers and the different plant life and the different trees, but in a couple years, all of those will be gone because you have things like teasle and a more honeysuckle. I'm onto that one. That one's the bane of my existence next to teasle. And everything will be gone. I personally live in the Midwest, right? Farming, agriculture. That is what our economy thrives off of, correct? Correct. I, being a forager, have the ability to have like a little sections of wilderness kind of around me. I live in like the second largest city here in a state which I won't talk about. I live in like the second largest city, and so I am lucky to be kind of on the outskirts of it enough where I have access to a little bit of wildlife, a little bit of woods, especially walking trails. Where you can forage because it's not technically private land and it's not a reserve or anything like that. It's not protected land. Just saying, if it's protected land, even though you really, really, really want to forage on it, don't forage on it because that stuff is being protected. I know it hurts. It hurts because, listen, I got the feeling the other day I wanted to go somewhere where there were a lot of linden trees and I couldn't because I knew if I went, I would just simply pick a bunch of stuff, take it home, and I feel like I would have hurt the ecosystem. So forage responsibly. More honeysuckle, teasle, autumn olive, and wild grapevine are the bane of the Midwest's biodiversity livelihood. Those are the big things that and garlic mustard also. But I say garlic mustard in a different text or subtext, because there are some invasive species that if you have a lot of foragers around who are able to keep down the population of how many plants are growing, it's kind of sustainable. Same thing with like mint. If you have a bunch of foragers or you yourself go and you collect a bunch of it, making it so that the plant stays extremely small, that's sustainable. But allowing it to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, that's just going to ruin the entire ecosystem. So on this trail, I was walking down it and I found some catnip, which is a type of mint, which if you have ever planted mint or if you know anything about mint, it spreads. It is invasive. Yes, it smells great. Yes, it makes great tea. But if left unchecked, it will completely take over the little ecosystem right around, where it creates like a bush, and then the bush gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I went out because there's only 2 patches on the trail that I go down most of the time. There are only 2 patches. And I got worried about the 2 patches because I'm like, oh, well, I have to make sure that I keep on this because otherwise they can get bigger. And I contemplated just digging it up and taking it home with me so that it doesn't, spread outside. But I thought I was keeping good track of it enough. When I went to go down, I make catnip cookies. I love to bake. So I like to take the ingredients that I forage and I like to cook them into things, mostly cookies. If I can find something where I can actively like bake with it, yes. And so that's why I love dandelion season. Dandelions, I can make an entire video about that, and maybe I will. So I go down this trail and I'm expecting to see a big bush because I hadn't gone down in a couple months, and I was worried that I was going to find this giant bush and that I was going to have to cut it all down, and make sure that it's all, back to being like a small manageable thing. The teasle had overcome it to the point where that invasive species was taken out by another invasive species. So what is this all about? Why am I talking about invasive species? Well, it's because local governments don't know what they're doing half the time when they go into these projects where there is already a trail. They kind of focus more on the advertisement of, oh, it's a place that you can walk. So they, lay down a foundation so that it's accessible, that you can walk down, right? And they are like, oh, okay, well, let's plant some more trees. So they find young trees and stuff like that, and they start planting them. And when I went out one day, I saw that they had planted all of these, and I was really excited because, one, I was looking for a Kentucky coffee tree. Now, obviously, that tree is not going to be done or ready to produce the pods anytime soon because it's a very, very young tree. So I came back this year. This was planted a while ago, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I went back and I couldn't find it. It was gone. But you know what was in its place? Teasle. So essentially, the Parks and Recreation, which I looked it up. Your city most likely has like a Parks and Recreation website where you can check out what projects that they're currently doing, what projects they have completed, and basically you can find out a little bit of information on what they are really concerned about. And I was surprised to find that the trail that is closest to where I live, the one that I use the most, it's done, according to them. It has been finished, which is it is the farthest from the truth that I think you can be, because you might not know what teasle is, but you absolutely know what a dandelion is. And if you've ever mowed your lawn, or if you've ever been in a garden and you're picking weeds, no matter how many times you pick the dandelions, they're going to come back because they have something called tap roots. Tap roots are really, really long roots that go all the way down to get more water, basically. And then they have some kind of offshoot roots, and that's generally what you're picking up. You're not picking up the tap root. So when you rip it out, you're only cutting it in half, really. And then the root itself grows back, makes another dandelion plant. This is the same with teasle, only teasle is like 5 times more sturdy than a dandelion root. Teasle also has tap roots, and I'll probably put a graphic up about what a tap root looks like, specifically with a dandelion versus a teasle. They aren't going anywhere. It is extremely difficult to get rid of them. But that is my little rant done. If you have any questions about why teasle is bad, or why I personally think it's the bane of my existence, you can always leave a comment. I'm happy to talk about it more, or talk about really any other plant, because I've been foraging for a while, and I've learned a couple things. I've learned a thing or two in my day. Also, I got a shout out to a very cool TikToker called Alexis Nicole, who kind of got me into foraging by watching her videos, because I didn't know that, these things were right next to me. I had no idea that, dandelions had so many uses. I had no idea that acorns have a bunch of uses. I went and I collected a bunch of acorns and I made acorn flour, and it's sitting in my fridge and I have to dehydrate it. And so I just want to say that she's amazing, and she's on TikTok. She's also known as the Black Forager, but she goes by Alexis Nicole on TikTok. She is amazing and so informative, and I love her energy, and please go watch her, because she knows so much. Okay, she knows so much. She knows more than me, and I thoroughly enjoy her content. And she is why I was inspired to make a video like this, and I will be making videos like this in the future, talking about invasive species, my personal pet peeves about certain plants, and plants that you can use, I don't know, in case the apocalypse breaks out. Because listen, if the apocalypse breaks out, I'm gonna be sitting on my porch, sipping my cup of coffee from my backyard that I made. And if you don't know how to make coffee from your backyard, maybe you want to know about that. I can tell you.